Wait a second.
You're live.
Great. Okay, great. Okay, so folks, we can get going now. Hello, and welcome to this webinar entitled After 2 years of genocide in Gaza, where is the path to peace and Palestinian liberation? It is organized by the International Manifesto Group. I'm Radhika Desai. I am the convener of the International Manifesto Group and the moderator of this event. In the recently announced 20-point peace plan for Gaza, as with everything else Donald Trump does, show is mixed with reality, smoke with mirrors, cloaks with daggers, and apparent determination with vacillation. This has not only been true of his on-again, off-again tariffs, but also of his peacemaking efforts, and both have deadly consequences. In Trump's pursuit of a Nobel Peace Prize, the White House has been hurling out peace initiatives nearly as often as his tariffs. Practically all of them descend into farce. Remember the North Korea deal of his first term? Though the initial confrontation between Rocketman and Dotard issued into a veritable love affair, and though they even led to a couple of summits that raised considerable hope among many serious observers, the end was a shambolic null. Trump had also promised to resolve the Ukraine conflict, indeed, to do so on the first day of his election, even before taking office. Well, Trump was elected and took office, but nearly a year since his election and more than 8 months in office, after giving Zelensky a dressing down that will be remembered for decades, and after the enigmatic Alaska summit with Putin, the best Trump can come up with is chiding and threatening Zelensky and Putin by turn. When the Gaza deal was published in full text last week, it was clear already that it was less a peace deal than a demand for Palestinian surrender. Palestinian surrender after almost a century of national liberation struggle. It was also clear that while most of the world, including China and Russia, seek a lasting peace on the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine, the US once again blocked yet another United States Security Council resolution, so that the only viable peace plan remains something concocted by Trump and Netanyahu, by Kushner and Blair, and it involves turning Gaza into an Anglo-American paradise for corporate profiteering. Still, given that after 2 years of relentless genocide, not only with bombs and drones and bullets, but also through starvation, the possibility of peace is too precious to be dismissed, even when it is a tiny needle hidden in a haystack of aggression. That is why most of the world received it with some optimism, if also caution, and that is why Hamas agreed to negotiate. Today, Sunday, the 5th of October, was supposed to be the deadline for all parties to agree. However, the situation remains extremely fluid. It's not at all clear whether the deadline will be strictly imposed or extended, or whether there will be an agreement, whether before or after the current deadline. In this situation, all we can do is identify the main moving parts in the situation so that we can keep our eye on them as it develops further. The first and possibly most fundamental is that on the Palestinian side, the issue is national liberation, something they have been fighting for, as I've said already, for a century, and not just since the 7th of October, 2023. Meanwhile, as a settler state, Israel is fighting to keep its ill-gotten territory and expand it. More immediately, the principal points to bear in mind are, at least to my mind, the following. That while Israel is supposed to have stopped bombing Gaza, it is widely reported, including in the mainstream Western press, that under one excuse or another, Israel has continued the bombardment of Gaza City and more widely. That Palestinian resistance remains resilient, still fighting, still making life difficult for the IDF. And this resilience is probably the principal reason for Israel to even consider this peace deal, even though it is more or less a demand for Palestinian surrender. and that though the Israeli occupation, wishing to pursue Israel's war to the end of Palestine and Palestinians, has criticized the deal but stopped short of toppling the government, it remains to be seen how long this posture lasts, given that Ben-Gvir has already threatened that if the Hamas terrorist organization, these are his words, continues to exist after the release of hostages, his party will refuse support to the government which it considers the architect of national defeat and global disgrace. Further, just as there's pressure on the Israeli government to continue the war, there's also pressure from the citizenry to make peace and release the hostages, and pressure from the military to do the same, because they're not actually able to achieve their aims and are exhausted. And this puts into question what finishing the job, which Netanyahu keeps threatening, might actually mean. Cracks in the Israeli state indeed are opening wider, with Press TV reporting in the last day or two that the Israeli chief of intelligence, Ronan Bar, believes Netanyahu to be responsible for the failures of October the 7th, as they see it, and the obstacle to peace and the release of hostages. Further, given that demand for Palestinian surrender dressed up as a peace deal is already so biased in favor of Israel, it will not be too difficult for Netanyahu to succumb to any of these pressures by picking on any one of the many clauses and pronounce dissatisfaction, particularly as his opposition, which is determined to expand Israeli territory, mounts further pressure. That a major sticking point for Hamas is going to be the issue of whether and how exactly it gives up its weapons. It has already clarified that it will not give up what it considers defensive weapons and will only turn over offensive ones to a trusted body that will be to be retrieved should hostilities resume. Meanwhile, President Trump, as with his alleged peacemaking elsewhere, is already reduced, if not to threatening Netanyahu and Hamas in turn equally, then at least to pleading with Netanyahu and threatening Hamas in turn so that he can get his Nobel Peace Prize. In this webinar, therefore, we have some of the most important observers of the scene, and they will undoubtedly expand more on the key points that we've come up with to keep an eye on as this situation develops. So let's just go to them. I will be introducing all the speakers in order as they come up. After they finish speaking, they will each speak for about 10 minutes each. We will have a question and answer session. And another preliminary, I'm conveying the regrets of Matteo Capasso, who is held up with other things and cannot join us today, but we still have 6 other speakers, and I'm sure they will be all extremely informative and inspiring. So let me introduce the first speaker. That is Sami Al-Banna, who is a political analyst. Sami, please go ahead and make your presentation.
Okay. What happened to the share? Okay. I don't know what happened to my share. That. Computer. I'm sorry, I'm finding it difficult to to share. So just give me 1 second.
Sure.
And I hope you don't take that from my time.
No, that's fine. I'm waiting. I'm just checking to see whether you are indeed co-host.
Yeah,
and yes, you are. So you
am,
should be able to.
And I keep saying share, and it takes me somewhere where.
Once you say share, it will give you a choice of windows to share, and you should pick the one you want to share.
Right. That's what I usually do, which is, I mean, I've been using Zoom for
Right. Okay. Sorry.
more than a decade, so I should know how it works. but for some reason they updated it and is giving me problem now sharing my PowerPoint, which I just did minutes ago. Uh, share. Okay, this is not it. This is not it. God. No, it is not
Oh,
accept.
okay. Have you chosen, if on the top of the screen that you should see, you should see screens, share screens, because there are three options: screens, documents, and advanced.
Right. Oh God. And on the top, you said on the top?
On the when you say share, it will show you. It will ask you to select a window or an application you want to share.
Right.
And then just underneath that is screens, documents, advanced, and your
Right.
screens should be selected.
All right. I am on screens actually.
Okay. And you can't see the screen you want to share.
It's coming totally blank for some reason. So let me start again.
Oh, maybe because you have to advance your remember, you might be in reading view, so you may have to advance your presentation, advance your slides.
Yeah, I am on the second slide already, actually.
Okay.
What this
Do
is?
you want to send it to me and I can advance it for you?
Uh yes, I don't
Just
mind.
email it to me.
Let's see. Uh, send a copy to this email
And
attack.
actually, since we are having these difficulties, what I'm going to do, Sami, is I'm going to ask Ben to start and you and I will sort this out and then you can go second. Yeah?
Sure, sure,
Okay.
sure.
Ben, are you okay with starting?
Yeah, I think Ben needs to be made a co-host.
Okay.
He's got a presentation as well.
Okay. Ben Norton, make co-host. Okay. Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Ben,
Okay, great.
please. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen as well, and let me see if this works.
Mhm.
All right, can you all see that?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the international implications of the U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza, and in particular, the drive for a new international order, which is something that is far from new, but I think we're actually seeing more momentum in response to these horrors that are being carried out. You know, there's this, it's kind of a cliche, but there's a very prescient quote by Gramsci who wrote that the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And then the latter part is often forgotten. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. And there can be few symptoms more morbid than this genocide that is being carried out by the US and Israel in Palestine. Now, it's noteworthy that Gramsci said that in 1930 on the eve of the rise of fascism. And I think what's actually very interesting is to see some of the shifts in Latin America. Today, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the perspective of some left-wing Latin American leaders. But I think one of the most interesting developments in the past few years has been the first ever rise of a left-wing government in Colombia, of Gustavo Petro. And honestly, he has surpassed my expectations in how principled he's been on many international issues. You know, Colombia, just a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, before Hugo Chavez's death in 2013, Chavez famously referred to Colombia as the Israel of Latin America. Israel was the most loyal U.S. proxy in the region, dominated by right-wing oligarchic forces. Petro is the first ever left-wing president of Colombia. There had been left-wing candidates who were killed in the past. And on the issue of Palestine, he's been extremely principled and outspoken. And he's said this point that he's repeated many times, and I think it's actually very interesting. He refers to the time we're living in as a global 1933 with the return of fascism. And he has repeatedly warned in the past 2 years during this genocide that, quote, Gaza is just the first experiment to deem all of us disposable, end quote. And then he added and he said, what we see in Palestine will also be the suffering of all of the peoples of the global south. And in particular, Petro, he has a Marxist background. He was in a revolutionary socialist armed group. They later signed a peace deal and put down their arms, but he never abandoned his left-wing, never abandoned the left-wing social movements that he's been part of. And he is also an environmentalist and focuses in particular on the effects of climate change. But of course, you could also just to understand this more broadly with the decline of capitalism. He focuses on how we're in a climate crisis and the West continues on defending its lifestyle of excessive consumption, which is predicated on the super exploitation of the global South. And as he put it, the global North, the imperialist countries, are willing to commit genocide and kill and abuse and terrorize the peoples of the global South. As the climate breaks down, there will be more migration, more crises. We see this with the abuse of immigrants in the United States. And his argument is that what is being done to the Palestinian people is what the imperial core plans on doing more generally to the global South. And I would say this is not just an issue of climate breakdown. This is an issue of capitalist crisis. We've seen across the global North severe declines in living standards, an increase in poverty. Life expectancies in the US for the younger generation for the first time are lower than those of their parents and grandparents. Clearly, capitalism is in severe crisis. And this is at a time when the Western countries can no longer resort to the super exploitation of the colonies that they had, the formal colonies that they had. And they're returning to this kind of 19th century style, more blatant imperialism. And we see this in Palestine. Lula, I started with them because, of course, always Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, which have revolutionary socialist governments, have always been the most principled and the most anti-imperialist. But we even see on the issue of Palestine that the more social democratic oriented, more progressive, not as radical governments in Latin America have also been very outspoken on Palestine, and it represents an important shift in this region. These leaders have been very outspoken against Israel and the United States. This is from the speech that Lula, the president of Brazil, gave at the United Nations this September, the UN General Assembly General Debate. And he said, nothing justifies the ongoing genocide in Gaza. International law and the myth of the ethical exceptionalism of the West are also buried there under the rubble with the Palestinians. And we've seen a massive shift in global opinion in the past 2 years. This is just looking at ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And it's noteworthy that, one, this poll was conducted before the return of Donald Trump. We've seen even more of a shift against the U.S. since the return of Trump. This is, when Biden was president and the U.S. pretended to care about multilateralism. It was obviously cynical propaganda. But what's also the other point that's noteworthy about this poll is if you look at the countries with large Muslim populations, especially Indonesia, the most populous Muslim majority country on earth, but also Malaysia, there's been a massive shift of public opinion away from the US and toward China. And this poll also, this doesn't mean that the people in all these countries are extremely anti-China. This is if they were only forced to pick one country, which is not realistic. What we're actually seeing is that more and more countries have taken a non-aligned position, and the genocide in Gaza has only reinforced the importance of these countries pursuing a different path. They can see the true face of US-led imperialism. We saw another clear example of this, how public opinion has moved sharply against the US and Israel. When Netanyahu delivered his speech at the General Assembly in September, there was the largest walkout I have ever seen. I mean, walkouts are not very common at the General Assembly, but when there are walkouts, I've never seen one this big. There was also another walkout against Netanyahu last year, but Netanyahu was speaking basically to an empty room. Dozens of countries, their representatives walked out in protest. Again, this just illustrates how isolated Israel is on the international stage. And I think the United Nations this year was actually this is all related to what's happening, this genocide in Gaza, which is really the breakdown of the US-led imperialist order. And we really see two competing visions that were articulated by the speeches given by Trump and by China's premier Li Qiang this year at the UN General Assembly. the United States so clearly, if you listen to Trump's speech, is saying that we don't care about multilateralism. We don't care about these international institutions. The U.S. only cares about this idea of America first, just blatant, bald-faced imperialism, threatening war in Venezuela, carrying out genocide in Gaza, attacking Iran, threatening to colonize Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal and Gaza. The plan is to colonize Gaza so Trump can build luxury real estate. And maybe in the short term, it will be run by this colonial, committee run ostensibly led by, the butcher of Iraq, Tony Blair. So that's one vision of trying to destroy all international institutions to try to save U.S. unipolarity on one side. But also, I think the speech given by China's premier, the second in command, Li Qiang, was very interesting. He emphasized the importance of reforming global governance institutions. I mean, I'll briefly talk about this toward the end. China has launched the Global Governance Initiative, and this is taken very seriously in Beijing. This is not just a talk shop. They understand that this is a moment in which it is extremely important, it is urgent to reform these international institutions so they can actually be platforms for the global South, not just neo-colonial institutions that are dominated by the West. And we also saw this in the way, I mean, this is not new, but the U.S. has completely weaponized every aspect of the international institutions that exist, including the financial system through the weaponization of the dollar and the use of sanctions and tariffs. Tariffs are really the weaponization of access to the U.S. market, just as sanctions are the weaponization of the dollar system. And we've also seen the U.S. weaponize the UN system, and the fact that the U.S. tragically is the headquarters of the UN are in New York City, and the U.S. has prevented Palestinians from attending UN meetings. So once again, showing how the U.S. is this complete rogue state. And you can see this so clearly reflected in the votes at the United Nations, where last year there was a vote on admitting Palestine as a full member state, and it was 75% of the world against the U.S. and a few proxies, 9 against 143. And what's interesting is also to note how even some European countries have been breaking with the U.S. on this particular issue. These are contradictions that are emerging even within the imperialist alliance. And what's striking is, you look at these maps of these votes. It's the same vote you see again and again, although with a few more European exceptions, but it is the US-led West against the rest of the world. This is a vote in 2023 condemning unilateral sanctions, the West against the rest of the world. This is a vote on a call for reaffirming the call for a new international economic order. Last year, 2024, was the 50th anniversary of the original call for the new international economic order, and the 50th anniversary of the founding of the G77. And so this is obviously not new. This has been the demand of the global South, the global majority, for many decades. But I really think that we actually are seeing in these moments, it has become so clear to the global majority that the current system cannot continue. There need to be fundamental changes, and the inability of the United Nations to stop the genocide in Gaza, with the U.S. using its veto 6 times in 2 years in the Security Council, 4 times under Biden, and 2 times thus far under Trump in 8 months. 6 vetoes to continue a genocide. It has just become so clear to the entire world that we need a new system. And this is why I think when China is talking about this idea of a global governance initiative, this is not just a talk shop. These initiatives in Beijing are taken very seriously. And that's why I'll say that, there's been a big debate. We've talked about it many times. There's been a debate on the international left about BRICS and organizations. Yeah. There's been a big debate about organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And critics have argued that they're not doing enough. And certainly, I mean, there can be criticisms, but I think, these are organizations that follow the legacy of the non-aligned movement, and there needs to be fundamental change. And if there is going to be change to prevent these kinds of genocides from happening in the future, to actually support movements for national liberation, it's going to be through these organizations that are trying to build a more multipolar world. So this is why I conclude with the same slide that I began about we are living in this interregnum that Gramsci observed in 1930. Now, what I hope is that it doesn't lead to World War II, which is what, of course, fascism ultimately led to. We're seeing very morbid symptoms indeed with the US-Israeli genocide in Gaza. But I think that this could be, as horrific and tragic as it is, this could be part of this very difficult process of a new world being born, where it becomes completely undeniable to the rest of the world that we cannot continue with this system as it exists of capitalism and imperialism, because it is a system predicated fundamentally on genocide. So on that, I'm going to conclude. I want to thank everyone for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing the other interventions today.
Thank you so much, Ben. As always, really excellent. And I also thought, as did lots of others in the chat, that you're bringing up that particular point that Petro made is really chilling. Thank you very much. We will go now to the next, the person who should have been our first speaker. Sami, please go ahead and try to share. If you can't, then I will share and I will advance the slides as you need. Okay, you can share. That's great.
Yes, it finally worked.
Can you also go to the reading view, if possible?
Yes, ma'am. 1 second.
And
please.
also, you are if you can remove that second image of you, then we might see better the slide.
I don't have an image. That's
Maybe if it's easy, maybe I'll just share, because I think in my case we shouldn't have. Let me just see
if
here.
you
Yeah,
allow me a
we won't
second.
have this problem. Because right now the presentation looks too small for anybody to see.
Right. I don't have an image, but if you allow me a second, do what you suggested earlier, which is to view in slideshow
Reading mode.
reading mode.
It's to the left. It's in the tabs, the icons. Go to reading mode. Third or fourth from the left. No. Below that. The line below that. No. The line below that. The icons below that. There. You'll find reading mode just below that.
All right.
Below your cursor. To the left. No.
No, view here. Reading.
Yes, reading view. That's it. Now, but you still need to remove that other image of you.
That I do not know where it's coming from.
But can I just share in your
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
So I'm going to share, but you're going to speak. Yeah, let's hope that works. So you stop sharing, please.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Looks
Yes.
good.
It looks good. Okay. So just say next slide, Sami, and I will advance it.
Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, here we go.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you all. And my apologies. It seems that too many upgrades to the system caused the problem. I have upgraded many things in the last week or so. Now, I am not an analyst, so you have to forgive me. I consider myself as part of the Palestine Revolution, which started way back in '65, and still an active supporter of that. Now, I'm going to go through what I consider is the current configuration of policies that the United States is implementing in the Middle East. And from this, I'm sorry, next slide, and I'll talk about one big shift that we have to recognize. I start my quotation much farther back than my friend Ben Norton. Dickens, writing about the French Revolution and the change in the European order. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, and it was the age of foolishness. Now, Currently, we're experiencing even more turbulent times. And the decline of the US empire, its unipolar global dominance, and the roles of its allies and proxies such as Israel makes us in a very, very turbulent times. Unfortunately, West Asia, in particular, which is most of my remarks will be focused on, is one of these areas which is going to have to pay a lot of prices, a lot of pain until we emerge from this phase. Palestine, including Gaza, is enduring genocide and severe sufferings in all parts of Palestine. I remain hopeful that the resurrection will emerge, and you could see the analogy here, emerge from the struggles of the Palestinian people, supported by most of humanity. And I want to emphasize that, by most of humanity. Indeed, what we have seen the last few weeks makes you feel there is hope. Now, nevertheless, and unfortunately, more wars are anticipated. Now, next, please. What is going on in West Asia is a shift in policy, at least from the US perspective, is a shift in policy from pivoting east to China to pivoting to Iran. Now, the pivoting east to China, which was the dominant porous policy formulation from about 2000, 25 years ago, till about 5 years ago, actually a little bit less, and where they started shifting to pivoting to Iran. You could see the overlapping timeline, which I will explain as we go ahead. Next, please. Now, pivoting to China meant the following things, and will continue to be an important part of this. There are 4, if you like, regions in the world: the United States, the prevailing perspective in the United States, I should say, had the Monroe Doctrine for Latin America, and they thought, at least until 2000, actually through 2010, that with the hegemony of the superpower in the beginning of 1990, the Monroe Doctrine is back in effect across all of Latin America. And the Western hegemony on Africa was on the same thing. It was the Western Europeans plus the United States. There is one fault line, and the fault line is east of Europe down to the east of the Mediterranean. That fault line, because there were security commitments of the United States. So we had the formulation of NATO expansion, EU expansion, and the colored revolutions to try. The dominant view since the 1990s was that we should bring down Russia and break it down into smaller countries and have the natural resources, because that is important for facing up to China. In the Middle East, there was a formulation which lasted 25 years also, and that was that the Arab Spring Sunni alliance plus Israeli security leading this alliance was sufficient to stop Iran and stop the expansion of China and Russia. Next, please. Hence, sorry, I should say, hence the policy to pivot to China. The policy to pivot China meant, and this is really big because quite a bit of the policies of the United States over the last 25 years meant 3 things: prepare for war with China, inhibit technological progress, and compete commercially with China. All of these were put into effect. Now there is a prevailing perspective which led to the shift in policy, which is that preparing for war can happen and is still happening, particularly around Taiwan and around the alliance between Australia and India and Japan, which now more or less is frozen or collapsed. Inhibiting technological progress is the area where the United States was almost totally defeated, and that really explains the madness of Mr. Trump. The competing commercially also didn't prove to be a very successful policy. All of these three policies are still in effect in Washington. However, realizing that with the changes in terms of particularly the technological progress and preparation for war, the shift happened. Next, please. Now, in order to shift east, the United States had to do three things, and it did them, and it didn't fully succeed. The first one is lowering US commitment in Europe and moving east. The second one is lowering US security commitments in West Asia and moving east. Now, in order for that to work, the policies, the so-called Abraham Accords and so on, had to really succeed. And that is really the fundamentals. Now, the United States did start what was called euphemistically an Arab NATO, involving Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. There were some issues between Turkey and Egypt, and there were issues also between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. But the United States was extremely optimistic on that. Of course, the major battles were fought in Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. And that is the shift that was taking place in this. But the Abraham Accord did not succeed, and hence we came to the new situation. Next slide, please. Now, I believe that U.S. started a policy called pivot to Iran. Now, the United States, we all know that the United States and Iran had a lot of issues over the nuclear accords, over sanctions, and so on. And by and large, it was following an Israeli line, but there was a growing concerns that those measures, i.e. particularly sanctions, did not really succeed, succeeded internationally, did not succeed inside Iran. And that's really the important thing, i.e. Iran was able to continue its socioeconomic development, is able to build alliances with Russia and with China, build a good relationship with Pakistan, and so on. So inside Iran, and the purpose of that policy was to bring down the government, clearly, is that economically, if you collapse, now. So there was a huge debate on what to do about Iran. Up to 2016, what to do about Iran was clear because the US military was very clear. We cannot do a land invasion of Iran. And all through even the presidency of President Bush, the last president we had, I forgot him because he forgot me. All of that, the US military was very solid. We cannot do it in the sense of land invasion to bring down the government. Came the Israeli formulation, but we can do it through other means. The US was hesitant until Trump took over power from Biden. Now, And that is really the beginning of the shift to the pivot to Iran. Next one, please. Now, several factors led to that shift. I will go through them very quickly. The first one is the Ukraine war and the defeat of NATO. Now,
Yeah, sorry, just Sami, you're already at about 12 minutes. So, yeah.
only.
You are already at about 12 minutes. So,
Okay.
yeah, sorry about that.
Well, there
No,
are
no,
a number of.
finish your slides. I'm just saying maybe hurry up a bit.
Okay. Now, Ukraine war and the defeat of NATO is critical for U.S. formulation, and we know what the results are. The U.S. extracted itself from direct funding of Ukraine, but not from the weapons or from working with the Europeans against that. And this war will continue until it burns out, which is in the horizon. The second thing is the rise of China in the 25 years, which meant a shift in several areas of competition, not only the commercial, but also energy. China moved in 20 years from a second power in the late 1990s to a major power, and then to the the preeminent economic power by 2017. But the energy needs of China also increased. At this point, China imports more than 50% of its oil and gas, both. I made the calculations based on both, based on this year and based also on the reserve. And more than 50% is dependent on GCC, Iran, and Iraq. Keep that in mind, and keep that in the Hermes. In other words, more than 50% today. They're opening land, they're opening trains to shift it, but it will take time. Now, and that is definitely attracted Washington attention, because if they can control the whole GCC plus Iran, and Iran shifting, then they could do it. Also, security pathways from east to west, the road initiative, and north to south, the Russian Indian initiative. Then, of course, they are controlling the core of BRICS. Now, on the other side, the US is sinking in debt. This year, we're expected to cross the $40 trillion. And there's no other solution, of course. Trump is tantruming with the tariffs, is tantruming with taking over Canada, or taking over the Panama Canal, or taking over the air base in Afghanistan. The issue is you can only solve the debt question is if you have a differential. And the determination in Washington, the differential is energy. I.e., if we control GCC plus Iran plus Iraq and South America, then we can A, control the flow of that energy, and B, the profit of that energy. That's the determination why these things are happening for Washington. Finally, and I will, out of respect, will stop. Meanwhile, resistance in West Asia has been increasing over the years, and therefore the framework of the Abraham Accords was not working, because there was massive resistance, both military as well as popular. And last but not least, of course, is October 7 and the start of the Gaza war, which all of that combined shifted the United States. Next, and I'll try to finish. Next, please. Okay. Now, I just want to mention the Iran war the 12-day war, was an attempt to destabilize Iran. It's a regime change operation. Okay. Now, we can talk with details about the operation, who won, who lost, who got hit, and so on. The point, the strategic point for Washington, it failed. Iran is stronger internally politically because this was an unmitigated foreign attack. Two, it failed because Iran did prove to have the stamina to withstand that. There's a lot of debate on these points, but the only thing I could say is the United States wants to go back to Iran. Not only China, not only Israel. Israel will do what Washington says. So the conclusion is the path to China is to subdue Iran and secure the energy resources of West Asia and disrupt BRICS. Next, please. I will go through the details, but I need more time. Go ahead, please. Next. In here, I just want to summarize where we are and what is coming next. Obviously, in the top, you see the three scenarios. And scenario number one is what Israel has been fighting for the last 2 years, which is defeat Hamas, disarm it, take over Gaza, depopulated, make it the Southern Riviera. That's basically the summary of this whole genocidal war. Now, on the right-hand side, of course, is a victory to the resistant forces. In between, there is some negotiated parts. The red line and the called A is where the Trump proposal is. All right. The struggles is to go to line B. I just make a few predictions and I've stopped, and I apologize deeply for that. Okay, likely development in the next few months, 90% war with Iran, in my view, and to finish the job, so to speak. Even after Trump's thing. Actually, Trump's thing is related to that, which we can talk about later. Now, relative failure of Israel in Gaza after even more genocide and destruction. So don't consider this is a truce. 2-3 months truce, there will be war and there will be a resumption of war. And again, 50% chance of a possible war in South America. I should mention about South America, the reason I lowered the probability of that is because of the position taken by China in support of Venezuela. And so the Americans now have to calculate whether China and Russia are going to be part of that or not. And I apologize.
Okay, first of all, let me say I'm sorry myself. I don't think you have anything to apologize for. It was an excellent presentation, and I think you've drawn our attention to a very critically important aspect of this, which I think tends to get neglected, especially given all the talk about pivot to China, which is, of course, very real. But so is, I think, what you're mentioning, which is the pivot to Iran. And I'm sure that there will be lots of time to at least make some of the further points you might have made in the question and answer session. So again, our apologies. I think perhaps we should have had fewer speakers, but or more webinars, and maybe that's what we'll do in the future. But for now, thank you very much. We really appreciate this excellent summary. And we go to our next speaker, who is Wang Shuijun. Wang Shuijun is the vice president of the Chinese Political Economy Society, and he joins us today from Beijing. So, Wang Shuijun, please go ahead. And I should say that he is not only staying up very late to talk to us, but he's on a train. So, thank you very much for making all this effort to be with us, Wang Shuijun. And please go ahead and give your presentation. Are you there, Wang Shuijun? Let me just check. Yeah, he's there. Wang Shuijun, can you hear us? And can you please?
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I'm so Clara. I'm so honored to be invited to attend this seminar. I'd like to say, India independent state is the only solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Since 2023, a new round of Israel-Palestinian conflict has triggered a serious humanitarian disaster. In the conflict, a large number of Palestinian civilians have suffered casualties. Their homes have been destroyed, basic necessities are scarce, and the educational and healthcare systems have been severely damaged. At the same time, the spillover effect of conflicts have made the situation of the Middle East more tense, seriously affecting regional economic development and stability. The inability of Palestine to establish an independent state is the root cause of the long-standing conflict between the Palestinians and Israel. The Palestinian people's right to establish a state, their right to survival, and their right to return have been ignored for the long time. Israel continues to expand settlements in the Palestinian territories, encroaching on Palestinian land and comprising Palestinian living space. This serious violation of Palestinian territorial sovereignty has escalated between the two sides. People live on this land for generations and have an inalienable right to self-determination. The United Nations and other international organizations have repeatedly emphasized the legitimacy of Palestinian sovereignty and independent state can the core contradictions between Palestine and Israel be fundamentally resolved, laying the foundation for peace. The United States have long been biased towards Israel on the Israel-Palestinian issue, which has led to the failure of the United Nations resolution on the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. The United States also provides significant military assistance to Israel. On November 20, 2024, the Council requested a vote on immediate ceasefire in Gaza Strip and the immediate release of all detained hostages. The draft received 14 votes in favor, but was not passed due to only one veto from the United States. China always supported the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. China was one of the earliest countries to support the Palestinian resistance movement and recognize the Palestinian liberation and the state of Palestine. Since the outbreak of the new round of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, China has expressed its support for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in serious documents. the Chinese position paper on resolving the Israel-Palestinian conflict and a statement to China and Arab countries on the question of Palestine. China's attitude towards the Israel-Palestinian conflict is in stark contrast to that of the United States. As of September 25, 2025, 157 countries, including China, Russia, and United Kingdom, France, have recognized the state of Palestine. At a time when the purpose of the United Nations Charter and international recognized laws are being undermined, countries around the world should unite to resist U.S. Israel hegemony and colonialism, and maintain the international core formed after World War II, with the United Nations at the core. Here, we call on the United Nations to quickly dispatch UN peacekeeping forces to end the difficulties in Gaza in order to achieve a rapid ceasefire and humanitarian assistance. Oh, that's all for my speech. I'm sorry, I'm in the train, so I just can't give a short speech. That's all.
Thank you very much, Wang Shuijun. I think that was a very good presentation based on, I think, obviously providing particularly a Chinese viewpoint, but also pointing to the centrality of the violation of UN rules and international law in the current situation. So thank you so much again, and thanks for joining us at this very late hour and from the train. And please stay if you can for the question and answer session. Okay, we will now go on to our next speaker. That is Sarah Flounders. Sarah is the co-director of the International Action Center, contributing editor of Workers' World News, and she also helps coordinate the United National Anti-War Committee in the United States. Sarah, please go ahead. Let me just make sure you can, Sarah.
Okay. Now I'm unmuted.
Great. Lovely.
Thank you, Radhika, and thank you to International Manifesto for another very thoughtful day of presentations. The world has profoundly changed in the 2 years of resistance in Gaza, and it has caused a global shift in political consciousness. There's a deeper understanding of imperialism and colonialism and of Zionism as a tool of the West, a colonial outpost. It's finally seen for what it is. Now, something else has shifted in the 2 years since this heroic, daring act of October 7th. The creative, simplest, high-tech ability of a surrounded, besieged, locked down people to organize a resistance, it's a shock to those who are so used to holding all the cards, all the weapons, and to threatening the world into obedience. Now, among so many youth, there is an embrace of the right to resist. Now, there's another shift. 2 years ago, all the appeals were to the great imperialist powers to break with Israel. There were endless appeals for the US, European Union countries to rein in Israel, to allow in food or supplies. Now, in its millions of people in actions large and small, whether it's a flotilla or it's cheering Yemeni missiles or holding the simplest picket line, there's a new level of understanding that it's up to mobilized people power globally to break through, to push through. It's clear there'll be no mercy from the imperialists. Any gain will be based on the strength of the demands and mobilizations from below. The duplicity of the ruling class in each country has been exposed. Italy and Spain grandly claimed they were sending Navy ships But it was not for the protection of a little flotilla of boats. It was to encourage people to turn back or to pick up the pieces. So this is matched by a raw determination to break through. Palestine has overwhelmed every other topic and campaign. In the US, every threat has been used, from suspending and expelling students and administration and staff and teachers and firing thousands for social media posts, even from protected and tenured jobs. It's meant mass arrests, but none of this has stopped the mass walkouts, the job actions, the national strikes. And they're no longer appeals. It's a growing awareness of people power and what it takes. There's a real shift of millions in the West, in the imperialist countries, not just for defending Palestine, but increasingly actually aligning with the global South. Both US imperialism and the Zionist movement are seething in frustration at their failure to defeat the Palestinian movement, and they're sensing their isolation and the hatred directed against them. So they're lashing out wildly and violently. Their message to the world is that there's no crime we won't commit. Trump threatens Palestine, then Yemen, Iran, then on to Venezuela. Now is sending troops into US cities. Every possible destabilization effort of countries all over the world is being made. Every coup that can be fomented. It's part of the drive right here in the US to cut every social program, to create misery and vicious occupation right here without limit. But the response is not a population that is cowering or hiding. Now, I want to talk about the peace plan, and it's, I feel, the latest exposure of their weakness and desperation. Netanyahu is just the attack dog, the enforcer of the US empire. Israel is isolated on a global scale, and it has failed, utterly failed, despite every form of mass terror, every crime of starvation, assassinations, random shootings, bombing of schools and hospitals, to defeat the Palestinian resistance. So it's clear they cannot continue. They lack the capacity, not the weapons, but the capacity. It's also clear to all the imperialists who rely on the Zionist movement to be their stormtroopers in West Asia that the Zionists are not capable of fulfilling their role, despite the endless shipments of weapons. It's clear they can't administer or secure Gaza. So the peace plan really announces that all the imperialists together and all of their collaborators and all of the countries already occupied by US bases and troops put together will collectively do what the Zionists could not do. That all of the predators together claim they're going to bail out the Zionists. Now, this peace plan excluded every Palestinian group, even the forces who were willing to be collaborators in the past, because they couldn't do it, so now they're just cast aside. Hamas and the whole Palestinian resistance was given 72 hours to totally surrender or face collective annihilation as a people. Hamas responded because they had to insert themselves into these horrific negotiations that had intentionally excluded them. We don't know what's ahead, but the world movement needs to first and foremost support any agreement that the Palestinian resistance groups make. Solidarity now is an obligation. No lecturing of the resistance where every leader, political, military, and diplomatic, has been hunted and assassinated using every high-tech form of weapons. Now, I want to jump from the peace plan to the global movement. We should take note of this general strike in Italy. It's something new, not seen in decades. It was a workers' strike, not on bread and butter issues, not against austerity and cutbacks, although that underlies a growing anger throughout Europe and here, the endless money for war. But this was a political strike. That's a qualitative change. The collective actions that we're seeing in Rome, in Milan, in Naples, and especially in Genoa, one of the largest ports in Europe, a multi-commodity port, a vital link in the trans-European transport network. So that's a big development, that political strike. The latest flotilla rode with the aspirations of millions to find a way to break through and give concrete aid. Now, these 50 small boats were stopped, and immediately another group of boats set sail from Turkey, and a large medical boat of doctors and health workers armed with medical supplies. And more flotillas are following, as is more struggle. There were breakthroughs in Germany where solidarity with Palestine, even mention of the word Palestine, is forbidden. Breakthroughs in France where so much was outlawed. Instead, there's huge solidarity. And in Britain, despite the harshest terrorism laws ever passed, they stood up to the efforts in large actions to criminalize Palestine action. In the US, the Trump administration gathered every one of the more than 800 generals, admirals, all the top brass at the Quantico military base. And what was the message? What was the message? That there be deployment of troops in the streets of our cities and an escalating racist war against migrant workers. Here, there's a war on workers and labor unions, 200,000 government workers fired without any notice, hundreds of thousands more being robbed of their right to a union, millions losing access to health care, food assistance, housing, that can no longer afford even basic necessities. Right now, all federal government services are shut down over a budget impasse that wants to cut far more. But in all this, it's the inspiration of Palestine that has led millions of youth to risk arrests, expulsions, suspensions from schools, firing from jobs. Websites and social media has been monitored, censored, shut down. The streets of New York during UN Week were an upheaval of nonstop demonstrations that were infuriated that Netanyahu was welcomed while Palestinians were canceled. It really confirms the collapse of this 8-decade international body. It's just tossed aside, dismissed. There's an all-out effort by the ruling class to silence resistance and normalize a level of violence, destroy the international law and the United Nations bodies they created over generations, and aid Israel in the bombing of Palestinian negotiators, even in Qatar, a US proxy, largest military base, who paid billions in protection money and demands to the US. The Trump administration helped orchestrate the assassination bombings of top government officials in Iran, in Yemen, in Lebanon, to overturn the whole government in Syria. They're seeking to expand war in Ukraine while attacking Venezuela, promoting regime change. They're threatening Mexico, Panama, Colombia, and demanding that every government surrender. And it's not happening. They're imposing tariffs globally, and this is unraveling the US economy. And all of it breeds resistance. There are new connections among people who identify with each other's struggles. That is a real change. The Palestinian resistance has continued generation after generation. They've made it clear they cannot be wiped out or their demands for sovereignty ignored. And now the youth of the West chant not only free, free Palestine, but death, death to the IDF. So these 2 years have changed everything. Let's embrace this change, take risks, refuse to back down, because a new day is painfully emerging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was again another really a fantastic set of reflections. I think joining what was said earlier, about why Gaza is being targeted. And I think part of what you're saying is that it is being targeted because it is so vulnerable. Unlike other parts of the world which have actual states, Palestine has never been allowed to be a state, and hence it is a sitting victim. But thank you very much, and I hope that there will be lots of questions about this as well. But let me now go to Charles Shu. Charles Shu is a representative of the Chao Collective, sorry. So please take it away, Charles. And Charles is our second last speaker. Our last speaker will be Professor Marandi, and then we will have questions and answers. Okay, Charles, please go ahead.
Right. Great. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Radhika. And thanks to the International Manifesto Group and all my co-panelists for making this event possible. I want to start off by acknowledging that since I drafted these prepared remarks about 2 weeks ago, many momentous events have transpired, most notably the global Samud flotilla, Trump's 20-point plan, its partial and provisional acceptance by the Palestinian resistance. Nonetheless, I believe the perspective I'm about to offer on the unique character of the Palestinian liberation struggle and the antinomies of formal statehood still holds true, and it will continue to do so no matter how the current conjuncture develops. So with that said, I want to take us back to what seems like ancient history now, September 15th, when a week after ordering a flagrantly illegal airstrike on the Hamas office in Doha, Benjamin Netanyahu warned Israelis in a very interesting speech about their growing isolation and the need to become a militarily and economically self-sufficient, quasi-autarkic super Sparta. And in this speech, he accused two countries specifically of supposedly coordinating anti-Zionist influence operations through social media. One, of course, was Qatar, which he had just bombed. The other, rather more unusually, was China. And I think in his remarks, we can detect a sort of backhanded envy, actually, of China's technological self-sufficiency, especially in the digital domain, and perhaps even an implicit call for Israel to emulate its sovereign developmental model. Of course, such a vision would be entirely illusory because Israel is wholly reliant on the collective West, and especially the US, for the military-industrial superiority that undergirds its very survival as a settler colonial ethno-state. And of course, as I've written about elsewhere, China's path of sovereign development in the face of imperialist siege has a lot more relevance to the battered but still undefeated axis of resistance than it does to its enemies. Of course, among its members, the Gaza resistance led by Hamas, Ansarullah in Yemen are still actively fighting. Hezbollah is steadily rebuilding its arsenal, and Iran, of course, showed its ability to absolutely humiliate the US-Israeli war machine in the 12-day imposed war, all of this with indigenously produced weapons. But what I would like to discuss in greater detail today than we've so far published in Chao Collective is how China's historical trajectory of struggle informs its foreign policy vis-a-vis Palestine today, which I think many well-meaning people in the solidarity movement may understandably criticize for its apparent limitations compared to the Mao period, especially now, 2 years into the most horrific genocide that most of us have ever witnessed. And I think it's important to contextualize all this in light of not just the historical arc of bilateral Palestine-China relations, but also the recently celebrated 80th anniversary of Japan's defeat in the World Anti-Fascist War, and also the conditional and purely symbolic recognition of the state of Palestine by 10 Western countries at the just concluded UN General Assembly. So to that end, we have to recognize in particular that the stages of China's long 20th century struggle for sovereignty and recognition do have obvious parallels, but also some important essential differences from the Palestinian one. In China's case, before 1949, you had semi-colonial subjugation, national disunity, and pretty much nonstop civil war, punctuated by just one period of nominally unified anti-colonial resistance against Japan from 1937 to 1945. And then from the revolution of 1949 onwards, for about 2 decades, You had, of course, national liberation, almost complete territorial unification through social revolution, which laid the foundations for real sovereignty, even under imperialist siege and exclusion from the Western-led global order. So that was what led into the 70s, where you then had progressive normalization with former imperialist enemies and colonizers, most notably Japan in 1971, and then the US in 1979. You had China's entry into the UN in 1971 and its growing diplomatic integration into the world order. And then basically from the start of the reform period onwards to the present, you had economic integration into the capitalist world system, but importantly, without compromising China's sovereign developmental prerogatives. And in those respects, I think we can, identify some key differences in the Palestinian experience, where in 1948, with the Nakba, and then following that, the Nakba of 1967, you had a near total loss of territorial sovereignty, which necessitated a long period of struggle, predominantly in exile. And then in 1988, you had the declaration and rapid recognition, initially by the socialist bloc in the global South, of a Palestinian state. But this was not accompanied by any recovery of real territorial sovereignty. And indeed, it paved the way for the official surrender of claims to 78% of historic Palestine in the Oslo Accords. It also led to the unreciprocated recognition of Israel and a stated commitment to the so-called two-state solution by the PLO, which of course opened the door for most of Palestine's diplomatic allies across the socialist and ex-socialist bloc and the global South to do so as well, including China, Vietnam, pretty much the entire former Soviet bloc and most African countries. And then to this day, this has led to a situation where the formal institutions of the state of Palestine are monopolized by an openly collaborationist regime, which directs its very limited firepower pretty much solely against the armed anti-Zionist resistance, with just a few notable exceptions, like during the Second Intifada. And I think this is really analogous to the Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek in the period between 1932 and 1937, when it was exclusively fighting the Communist Party and not Japan, but with the proviso that the Palestinian Authority has no real territorial control whatsoever. So this analysis is, I think, increasingly predominant, not just in the Western solidarity movement, but also in Chinese popular discourse and civil society. We've documented this, for example, in our translation of Shattering the Iron Wall, which is a hugely popular Chinese analysis on the martyrdom of Yahya Sinwar. And no doubt the leadership is privately aware of that reality as well. But the fact is, I think that China's public positions and that of most of the global South are constrained by its formal relations with the actually existing state of Palestine and the need to treat it with its institutions as they exist as a normal state, right, whose independence and sovereignty are just as substantive as that of China or any other country. So under those limitations, nonetheless, I think there have been some clear signs of official Chinese recognition of the distinct conditions of the Palestinian struggle. And these are really important to highlight. One, of course, is China's strident refusal to delegitimize Hamas or other armed resistance groups as so-called terrorist groups. Rather, it embraces them as national liberation forces, as organic parts of the Palestinian polity, and it has refused to this day to overtly condemn Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. You also had early last year Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Ma Xinmin intervening overtly in support of the right to national liberation through armed struggle at the International Court of Justice. And then I think most notably last July 2024, you had the Beijing Declaration, which was negotiated and signed by 14 Palestinian factions in China, including both Hamas and Fatah, as well as pretty much all of the rest of the armed resistance groups. And I think the process leading up to this was doubtless informed by the CPC's own wartime experience of having to unite with erstwhile neutral or collaborationist forces, namely the Kuomintang, against Japan as a precondition for anti-colonial liberation. So all of this is to say that, when China officially refers to a two-state framework, which it still does, the Palestinian state that's envisioned there is one that has real territorial sovereignty, has the right of return to 48 Palestine. It has the capacity for armed self-defense, and it requires the democratic inclusion of all political factions, including armed resistance groups. And I think there's a world of difference between that vision and the honestly insulting, not to mention impracticable conditions on disarmament and exclusion of Hamas, which were the condition, right, that Western states imposed for their recent, highly symbolic and cynical recognitions of the state of Palestine. Nonetheless, there is, I think, an essential contradiction that's inherent to any two-state framework, which is that Israel, unlike, for example, Japan, is a settler colony that exists entirely on occupied Palestinian land. And because of that, the PLO's normalization with Israel in 1993 cannot be analogized in any way to the People's Republic of China's normalization with Japan in 1971, because the former ultimately marked a political defeat and an abrogation of sovereignty, whereas the latter was a political victory grounded in the affirmation of the PRC's sovereignty. Of course, China, under current conditions, can't openly acknowledge this at an official level, but I think we in the Solidarity movement can and must. That said, and I'm going to start wrapping up now, I think we can't ignore that China did have direct experience, not just of colonialism, but of settler colonialism specifically, namely the Japanese occupation of Northeast China, also known as Manchuria, from 1931 to 1945, whose anniversary we recently marked on September 18th. And I have a couple things to say about this. One is that, while distinct from the Zionist project in that it relied on enslavement rather than expulsion of the native population, and it only lasted for 14 years rather than 77 plus. The Japanese colonization of Manchuria did involve the violent implantation of over 500,000 Japanese settlers. And it's true that the vast majority were quickly repatriated to the Japanese home islands after the Soviet Red Army liberated Manchuria in 1945 with crucial help from Chinese and Korean communists. But some settlers stayed behind. And their extraordinarily humane treatment from the CPC and from ordinary Chinese civilians, I think, is a story that is criminally underreported today. You had 4,000 Japanese orphans that were adopted into Chinese peasant families. You had Japanese prisoners of war captured by the communists who spoke almost uniformly of the extremely generous conditions of their captivity. Most successfully underwent non-coercive anti-imperialist re-education, and some even joined the victorious liberation struggle of the CPC. This is a story that I think has very few parallels in history, but by far the most relevant today is the extraordinarily humane treatment of Israeli captives by the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, which of course is grounded in Islamic principles. Just to wrap up, I want to note that ultimately the settler project in Manchuria collapsed almost overnight, but it did so only as a result of the total defeat of its imperial metropole, Japan, by an international coalition, in which China, of course, played a leading but by no means exclusive role. And to analogize that to the current situation, the closest analog to a metropole for the Zionist settler project is the collective West, and especially the US. Their global hegemony will be incomparably harder to overthrow than Japan's regional empire in World War II. But I think China and the rising tide of multipolarity are ineluctably creating the long-term conditions for the demise of that hegemony, albeit on a type scale that may seem agonizingly protracted given the urgency of the moment. So with that, I want to wrap up, and thank you again.
Thanks so much, Charles. Again, another really excellent overview, I think, of the the commitment that China has had over a long period of time to the Palestinian cause. So thank you very much. Okay, we now go to our final speaker, Professor Mohammed Marandi. I see while before we go there, I see that lots of really excellent questions are being raised in the chat. So I'm hoping that you will all raise them afterwards because, of course, our speakers have had very limited time and I'm sure they have lots more to say. So please make them do that in the time that we have left. Professor Marandi needs very little introduction. He is formerly professor of comparative literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, but of course he is known to most of us because of his extensive speaking out both on the mainstream media and on the social media on the cause of Iran, of Palestine, and more generally of anti-imperialism around the world. So Professor Marandi, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I was listening to the previous guests, and really I have very little to add, if anything. I think that
actually, if you don't mind my interrupting, I meant to say earlier that a lot of speakers would particularly like you to discuss what has been happening over the last week with the so-called peace plan. So you do have perhaps something to add, but go ahead.
I think, again, I heard our colleagues and friends speak about the peace plan. I think the first and foremost thing that I have to point out, which is a repetition of what everyone else has or many others have already said, is that the world has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. And this is something that I think people like myself never expected to happen, at least in my lifetime, where there's such a sea change in public view and about how the public views, both in the West and in the rest of the world, how it views Palestine and how it views Zionism and how it views the role that the West is playing in our part of the world. This, I think, is the most important defeat that the empire has been forced to accept. Even Trump, in a statement attributed to him, said that Netanyahu went too far, that Israel has become marginalized. I haven't seen him say it himself, but I've read that he said that the Israeli regime has become isolated and that he is going to bring things back to normal, which of course is impossible for him to do, both because he has no credibility, but also because that genocidal regimes cannot be rehabilitated. But it does show that even Trump, with all his ignorance and his shallow thinking, recognizes the situation or the plight that the Israeli regime is in. And that is because of global awareness. So these 2 years have been very painful. Hundreds of thousands of people have been massacred, mostly in Gaza, but also in Lebanon and Yemen and elsewhere. And of course in Iran too. All of those countries that have been a part of the Axis have paid a heavy price. But I think that it's clear that the regime losing face in this way and being delegitimized in the eyes of the international community is enormous. And it is big, it is huge, and it is unprecedented for us. So we have to build on this. And we have to continue creating awareness. We have to especially work harder on Jewish communities across the world because they are the ones who the regime and Zionists are focusing on the most to preserve. So we have to create greater awareness in general, but I think it's time, especially for our friends in Europe and North America, to focus on young Jews and the brainwashing of Zionism. In recent days, we saw, of course, Trump's threats, and then the resistance groups' response, led by, of course, Hamas, but also Islamic Jihad, has said that they support the Hamas position. Hezbollah has also said it supports the Hamas position. Ansarullah in Yemen has also supported the Hamas position. And of course, Iran will always support the Hamas position and the Ansarullah position, the Hezbollah position, and the Islamic Jihad position. What is clear is that Trump wanted this so-called peace proposal to be imposed on the people of Gaza and to force capitulation and defeat on the Palestinian people through threats and through threatening the entire population with complete annihilation, which is, of course, something that is no longer strange. After the genocide that we've seen over the past few years, anything that the West says, anything that Western elites say about slaughter and murder is ordinary now. And if they start threatening the people of Venezuela, we have to take it seriously. If they start threatening to slaughter people in the Mediterranean, we have to take it seriously because the mask has been removed. There's no longer the narrative of human rights or freedom. That is all gone. The West has, the collective West, the elites in the West have gone back to the mid-20th century, the early 20th century, the 19th century, where they've used the language of brute force. I think even it can be said that they've even gone beyond the era of the civilizing mission, and they've gone to the era before the civilizing mission, where it was just sheer brutality and there were no excuses. But the West, this collective West, is much weaker. And I think that the fact that Trump hosted the Hamas response, which was developed in coordination with other resistance groups, as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad statement clearly pointed out, it showed that he is not as strong as he pretends, because his expectations and his demands did not coincide with the statement of the Palestinians, with the statement of the resistance that was put out by Hamas. For example, Hamas is clear that someone like Blair, who is a symbol of death and destruction and hypocrisy and dishonesty, it was clear from the Hamas response that Blair would not have any role to play in ruling over the Palestinian people. What the resistance did offer was a negotiation to exchange prisoners, for the Israeli regime to retreat, for the Palestinian areas in Gaza to be rebuilt. That can be discussed. But the resistance did not discuss the nature and future of Palestine itself, let alone Gaza, which is a part of Palestine. So they did not accept any long-term role or any even short-term role imposed by the West with regards to the governance of Gaza. They accepted a technocratic government if the negotiations go well, which is not clear at all. If there's going to be a breakdown within hours or within days or weeks or months, we don't know at this stage where this will lead. But obviously, by stating that they will accept technocrats, that means this will be a transition period. And obviously, what Hamas is doing, it is saying that at the end of the day, any decision has to be made by the Palestinian people. So Hamas can negotiate over that which it has authority, and that is the prisoners, and that is, of course, the state of the battlefield and the future of peace and war in Gaza. But they will not negotiate the fate of Gaza, because that has to do with the collective Palestinian population. And it goes beyond the mandate of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. As one of the previous guests rightly pointed out, we should not at all criticize Hamas. It was a very well-crafted statement. It was a rejection of capitulation. It was a sign, ultimately, when Trump posted it, that Trump accepted its validity, and that if we put it alongside Trump's threat, it shows that Trump is not as strong as he claims. The very fact that the Hamas statement was posted was, I think, a major victory. Perhaps a foolish mistake by Trump, not quite understanding what Hamas is saying, and perhaps not. I tend to think that he did not read or understand the text very well. But I think that it was a very well written text. I assume that they received help from their friends, whether in Lebanon or in Yemen or in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad leadership or in Iran, or they sought their advice and but ultimately it is their text, and all the resistance groups and resistance entities within the axis of resistance have given them their full support. Our responsibility is to do what we've been doing up to now. There's no letting up. The regime is now taking over social media. They're taking over mainstream media, even more than before. So we have to press harder. We cannot become indifferent, because perhaps in the coming days, the number of children murdered, the number of women murdered may decrease. It may or may not decrease. But there may be a tendency for people to think that the situation is now better, so we can go back to our ordinary affairs. In fact, as probably more than one guest, but as one guest quite clearly pointed out, there's a direct link between the fate of the Palestinian people and the fate of all of us. In other countries, the role that the empire is playing at home and the role that its proxies are playing across the global south and across our region, all of these are linked now to the Palestinian cause. We've seen, for example, in the case of Morocco, how people have been rising up both due to social grievances, but also because of the regime's close relationship with the Israeli regime. In order to bring about a better future for ourselves and for our children and for our neighbors and for our fellow human beings, we have to press hard. And now that the empire has shown weakness, I think that if we do not push harder, we've done a great disservice to ourselves and our fellow human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. I think, obviously, this has been a very important subject. I've not been overly strict with the speakers, so we are now at about 1 hour and 40 minutes past our start time. Nevertheless, we have at least 20 minutes, and we can go a little bit over if there are lots of questions and answers. I see one hand is already up. So if you have any questions, please, and as I said, there were excellent questions in the chat, so please feel free to raise them. Meanwhile, I will go to the questions, but while you are thinking of them, let me also urge you to please all, number one, go to our website, www.internationalmanifesto.org. Please subscribe to our updates, where we will always update you on our upcoming events. Consider reading and signing the manifesto. Consider donating. And above all, please tell your friends about these webinars and circulate our notices further. Okay, I see that there are some questions coming up. I will go first of all to Dr. Kim Eng-koo. Please, and of course, in the interest of keeping, of getting most out of what our speakers have to say, please keep your questions brief. Dr. Koo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika. I'm actually asking for an appeal, in the sense that this coming Tuesday, October 7th, is the second anniversary of the genocide in Gaza. And I'm asking everybody to light a candle in the evening of that day to guide the dead home. That's the belief that my family, Chinese family, believe that when you light a candle, you guide the dead home. So I'm asking everybody, if possible, light a candle on the evening of October 7th, so that you show your solidarity and you guide the dead home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koo. Okay, I will take 3 questions and then go to the speakers. Carlos, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Radhika, and thanks so much to all of the speakers. I think, the quality of the contributions has been really quite incredible, and, a lot of insight we've heard today. I just wanted to pick up on one point. Ben quoted Gramsci on the old world dying while the new world struggles to be born. And it kind of occurred to me that Gramsci is also, of course, very well known for developing a sort of collective movement's understanding of cultural hegemony, whereby the ruling class uses media, uses culture, uses the education system, the force of tradition, bribery, and so on, to consolidate its rule. And, the genocide in Gaza and the extraordinary heroism, resistance, and resilience of the Palestinian people is dismantling that cultural hegemony. People are seeing a genocide taking place in real time, and their governments and their media are telling them that it's not taking place. So people can see that they're being gaslit. So in terms of the Palestinian question, that's causing people to shift from a position of sort of, maybe liberal sympathy with Palestinians to a position of opposing colonialism, opposing Zionism, racism, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. And beyond Palestine, it's causing people to question other myths that they've been fed for so long, be it in relation to, that China's carrying out a genocide in Xinjiang, or, questioning the narrative on Ukraine that Putin's this crazy tyrant who wants to create an empire, and that NATO is waging a just struggle for freedom and democracy, or questioning this narrative that Iran is some kind of totalitarian regime and a threat to peace. So we're seeing a real shift in people's consciousness. And in that way, when we talk about the Palestinian resistance as the cutting edge of the global struggle against imperialism, I think that's an idea with very real and very material meaning. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Thrasivoulos, I hope I said that correctly, but please go ahead. Oh, hang on, I must unmute you. Yeah, there you go. Please go ahead. We still can't hear you, although you are unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Radhika, and thank you to all the organizers and speakers. As always, it's a very, very interesting show. I'll be very brief because I have 2 questions I think very important. The first one is for Professor Marandi. We know that in June, the June war, the biggest problem Iran faced was the so-called inner front, especially in the first 24 or 48 hours. How much better prepared do you think, dear Professor, is Iran now in this respect? And the second question is a general question about the Trump and Netanyahu plan for Gaza. Everybody knows that the resistance has agreed, not only now, but already last year, to hand over power to Palestinian, and not foreign, but Palestinian technocrats. My question is, how can it be possible that those technocrats would not be linked in a way or another to the Abbas regime and so controlled by the Zionists? Isn't that too dangerous a step to take from the resistance? Thank you very much.
Okay, it seems like there are no other questions. So clearly we have been, we've had a fairly comprehensive set of presentations. So maybe what I'll do is I will ask the speakers to respond, maybe beginning with Professor Marandi, since the question was, the only question in the thing was for him. I see one more, but I'll come back to you, Sarah and Zakir, just one second. And then, so I'll ask Professor Marandi to go first, and I'll ask Professor Ms. Sami Al-Banna to go next, because we did interrupt his rather informative presentation, so if he has any points to add. And in responding to the questions, of course, the speakers should feel free to respond to one another's presentations as well. Very quickly, I see 2 people. I'm going to include them and then go to the speakers, and then that will end the webinar. So Sarah and Zakir, please go ahead. Oh, hang on. Do I have to? Yes, I think you managed to unmute yourselves.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, this is Zakir here. I just wanted to ask, not directed at any specific contributor, but just in terms of the attention that and the global media attention that has been dedicated towards the Samud flotilla in recent weeks, especially since the kidnapping. Um, how do we, considering this is in some ways a symptom of a mobilization when the international solidarity movement has got a significant level of impotence in the inability to stop the genocide. Um, the fact that humanitarianism as a vehicle for kind of contributing to that goal, it seems perhaps that it is capturing so much attention and a certain type of hype and spectacle that less attention is being turned to the fact that when some of the flotillas are seized, the provisions that are being taken are being given straight to Zionist armed gangs within the Gaza Strip, which are being then used as a way to challenge the resistance's ability to have a level of kind of sovereignty and control over the Strip. So I just wanted to perhaps for us to have a kind of a communal assessment of what it means that there is so much focus and attention on the Samud flotilla in this moment, and how we might be able to combat that. And of course, we all want to see the siege broken, but perhaps an assessment on our collective strategies moving forward.
Thanks so much, Zakir. And finally, a question from Richard Wright. Richard, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let me follow up on the question that was just asked. I have a lot more questions than that, but let me just follow up on the question that was asked. And that is that for as long as I've been alive, and I'm 70-something years old now, there's been a lot of demonstrations, a lot of messaging out there. And I'm wondering if maybe we've reached an end to that. If maybe we need to start considering more direct action, other than messaging things like flotillas, handing out banners on overpasses, and maybe we need to mobilize, get deeper into the society and mobilize there, as opposed to what I regard as sort of symbolic messages. So maybe if you could address, sort of both those questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we will go to Professor Marandi first, and then to Sami Al-Banna, and then Sarah. I think those are the only speakers we have left with us for now. Oh no, Charles and Charles. So in that order, please go ahead, Professor Marandi.
Well, thank you for the questions. With regards to the situation in Iran, ever since the halt of fighting, the Iranians have been preparing themselves under the assumption that we will have another round of war, and that the Israeli regime and the United States are, as we speak, conspiring to attack the country. As I said earlier, that international law, human rights, freedom, all these slogans of the empire have been thrown out the window, and they've gone back to the crude methods of past, and they no longer try to hide their brutality and the crimes that they commit with terms such as civilizing mission or the others like freedom and human rights. So they are preparing themselves. Obviously, there's a difference between Iran and the Israeli regime. Iran is not supported by any superpower. Iran has friends in BRICS across the global south or the global majority. And of course, its relations with Russia and China are quite good. But at the end of the day, the Iranians are on their own. And unlike the Israeli regime, they do not have infinite access to whatever the United States has. Whatever technology the United States has it goes to Israel, it goes to occupied Palestine. Ukraine could only dream of the sort of weapons that the Israeli regime has at its disposal. But in any case, I think that if there is another attack, another blitzkrieg attack, the day one will probably be less effective, although any blitzkrieg attack is going to have consequences. But the Iranians are more prepared today. And also their defensive and offensive capabilities, I think, are much more or significantly more adequate and than before, because the Iranians have seen their weaknesses, they've seen their strengths, they've seen the enemy's weaknesses and strengths. The enemy gave it its best shot, so much of their capabilities have been analyzed by the Iranians, and they're now restructuring and rebuilding and preparing for the future. So I think that if there's another war, it will be worse for the Israeli regime than last time round. With regards to the negotiations, it's, I think it's very difficult for anyone to answer, including the leaders of the resistance. Obviously, there will be, if the ceasefire and if the peace deal if there's any progress, it will be slow, and the negotiations will be taking place on all the different issues. And if we reach a stage, and that's a big if, where technocrats rule Gaza, I think that there will be major negotiations about each individual and every step of the way. So we're very far from there. What we from the outside need to do is to continue pushing to increase the pressure and make even the social, one thing that we and which has been said is that the Israeli regime not only Zionists control U.S. foreign policy and the foreign policy of the West in general, especially in West Asia and North Africa, but their actions are now having grave consequences for societies in the West. And so all of these should be made key issues for ordinary people. Awareness should be created or enhanced so that the regime pays a price for taking TikTok, so that it pays a price for increasing its hold over social media and through controlling speech. With regards to the way forward, since I'm in Iran, I don't want to speak about direct action or anything like that, because then that will have consequences perhaps for others, which, being from Iran, immediately some people may start accusing all of you of some sort of connection with Tehran. That is, I guess, for societies and individuals and groups to decide. But I think what is important is to try to increase the number of people who support the resistance, the general, and I don't mean just the resistance in Gaza, but the resistance in general, the broader resistance. We have to. I think it's had a huge impact already. Those people in previous years, such as yourself, when you put up posters or when you put up stickers or when you protested, the fruits of those protests are what we're seeing today, what we're seeing in Spain, what we're seeing in Italy, what we're seeing in North America, what we're seeing across Europe and across the global majority. These are the fruits of the resistance of people that have been active during those very dark days when most people were completely indifferent. Where I recall once when I was in Vienna at the nuclear negotiations, there were 4 or 5 people in the city center protesting about Snowden, I think, and there were a small group of people, and thousands of people were walking by doing their shopping, mostly indifferent, maybe casting a brief glance at these people. But this resistance is the foundations of what we have today. If this resistance did not exist back then, I seriously doubt that we would be where we are now. So I think that all of you who've been involved in these sort of things have done very important work. Now, what should be done in the future? That is for each people in different societies to decide, because different societies have different needs and different situations, and there's not a single solution for every case. But even if we don't necessarily always agree with the methods, I think we should be careful not to clash internally. The focus has to be on the enemy. So I've seen, for example, some people critique the flotilla and saying maybe it should have been done this way or that way. The focus should be on if something is being done and we don't agree with it 100%, let's not weaken it, but let's try to strengthen the parts that we think are worthwhile and not weaken the work of others. So all of our energy should be focused on the enemy, and the enemy is those forces of oppression and genocide, and the forces that wish to make the lives of humanity miserable. I'm very optimistic about the future, but I'm not that naive. I think we have dark days and months and perhaps years ahead of us. But when I look at the awakening that has come about over the last couple of years, I'm quite stunned. I never thought I'd see the day when people across the world view Palestine and the Israeli regime the way in which they do now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Indeed, so much has changed, and I think that the role of ordinary people's resistance and of all of us doing our bit is so critically important. Sami Al-Banna, please, I know you may have lots to say about various things you've heard, and make any points that you perhaps feel particularly strongly that you shouldn't have had to miss. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for staying this late. The first question that was asked about the technocrats in Gaza. The answer to that is really simple. The chances of some of the technocrats or half of them being affiliated with the Sultan al-Palestinian, with the Palestinian Authority, are very high. So I want to start there to clarify this. The struggle is very complex. And I think, at least from my perspective, that support of all forms of struggle of the Palestinian people is necessary. We may have our inclination. I do have my inclinations. I support the resistance, the armed resistance, but there are other forms of resistance which we support that the Palestinians have undertaken. And in spite of all the criticisms for Mahmoud Abbas and his outfit, I will refrain from attacking him because that is sort of part of the game. There's a famous letter that Ho Chi Minh sent to the emperor of Vietnam when they were in the midst of the struggle, and France was approaching the emperor to sort of play the role of Mahmoud Abbas today. And I recommend that we read it again. In a national liberation struggle, the spread of different opinions and so on is extremely strong. Let us focus on supporting the struggle of the Palestinian people and their resistance, but also on their struggle. Now, I doesn't mean I support Ramallah's policies, please. It just means that I respect that some of them may have a different opinion, but the Palestinians, at least, are continuing their struggle. The second point that I want to address, there's just too many points. But in a way, it's a question to my friend Muhammad, Sayyid Muhammad. The reports I read suggest there has been massive Russian and Chinese infusion of weapons and technical support for Iran post the 12 days war, particularly in the areas of aerial defense, in the areas of rocketry, and so on. I definitely do not think it is a reducing Iran's success by accepting that support and that preparation. The preparation is very strong. I agree with him. The Iranian people have proven that they are ready for the challenge. And more importantly, as per the president of Iran here in New York, here I mean in New York, I'm not in New York. What he said was very important. The Iranian government is not taking any assumptions about the next rounds of the war, and that we are, this is a quote, and that we are, referring to the Iranians, are preparing every means possible for this next round. And I should say that the American reports on the other side not only suggest the same thing, but also suggest something else. And that is the struggle within the American administration is to overcome the resistance of the military for land operations. We know they have deployed about 12 tankers in Qatar right after signing this new agreement with Qatar, which we should really talk about at some point, because it's very important in this context. But nevertheless, and they have the experiment. The last week, U.S. has landed big military transporters in Syria, near Damascus, not in the east of Syria, in Al-Mazza airport, right near Damascus. So there is a massive preparation of war that is, and incidentally, at least one, possibly two aircraft carriers have entered the Mediterranean as of last few days. So there is a movement of forces that is very alarming in the direction of waging a war on Iran. And that is what I said in my speech. There's a lot of points, but I'm going to stop. I'm sorry.
I'm sure, unfortunately, for reasons that you and others, Professor Marandi, others have pointed out, this struggle is not going to end anytime soon. And we're bound to have, I think, more discussions of this matter further. So I'm sure, Sami, you'll be joining us then, because we found your work excellent. Thank you so much. We will next go to Charles Shu. Charles, sorry, did you want to say something more, Sami? You're muted now for some reason.
More influence, I think.
Sorry, please repeat that, because you were muted when you said it.
I should draw attention to the response of Hamas, in which it referenced their response as a hudna. Okay, which means well, hudna is not only ceasefire, but it is like a stopping fighting. Okay, in Arabic. Okay, and so there is no illusions, and I listened to about 3 speakers from Hamas in Arabic this morning. Okay, and they all emphasized that there is no illusion that this agreement, while it might stop the fighting, which is good, while it might stop the killing, which is good, but it will break down. It will have to break down because Israel is unstable, not because Hamas is going to break it down. But we can elaborate at some other session.
Okay, thank you again. Charles, please take any and all questions you'd like to address. And of course, anything you want to address in what other speakers said.
Absolutely. Thank you, Radhika. I know we're a little pressed for time, so I'll try to keep it brief and limited to the questions that were asked. In regards to the mooted technocratic government, it seems to me that it is a side of active contestation, right? And this is one point where Hamas and the rest of the Palestinian resistance have consistently made clear that their responsibility ultimately is not to their own like self-perpetuation as like a de facto governing entity, but to the Palestinian, the obligations to the Palestinian nation, right, to building a national consensus. And in that regard, if or when negotiations as to the composition of such a government would eventually ensue, it's something where I think we can expect that to continue to be their line, and where ultimately what matters is the balance of forces on the ground, right? Where we know that the resistance in Gaza led by Hamas has held out, has survived, has thwarted all of the military aims of the Zionist entity, backed fully by the entire imperialist world for 2 years now, and to expect that it will simply roll over, and disarm and hand over authority to what is openly like a collaborationist and imposed regime, I think is it would be a complete break with what we've seen, and ultimately, if they've been able to hold out this long against the genocide directly, then I can't imagine them consenting to ultimately a rehashed version of the occupation through completely undemocratically selected and imposed nominally Palestinian intermediaries. With regards to the flotilla, I think that the point of the flotilla was not really the material quantity of aid. It was always acknowledged that that would be a drop in the bucket compared to the actual humanitarian need on the ground, but kind of the symbolic significance of the scale of the multinational coalition and the mobilization, and also the fact that unlike all of the other aid schemes, right, whether the absolutely abhorrent so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or the airdrops, right, by various like Western or comprador Arab states, this one was not coordinated with the Zionist authorities, right? It was intentionally seeking to break the blockade and to do an end run, albeit a mostly symbolic one, around the vice that they have imposed, right? The siege that they have imposed since 2007. So I think in that regard, the fact that what little aid, again in comparison to the need, right, was on those boats is in the hands of the Zionist regime. I mean, effectively, like all of the aid that has gotten in, right, has gotten in under their terms already. So to me, I think what really matters about the flotilla is the manner in which they were seeking to get it in, and that's been the reason why it's been such a catalyst, right, for the global solidarity movement, especially throughout the Mediterranean and in Southern Europe. And then, lastly, to Richard's question about weighing the efficacy of various tactics. I don't want to put our comrades in Britain in a compromising position or risk, this video getting taken down in the UK. But all I will say in that regard is that the proscription of a certain group there, is a testament to the efficacy of their methods, right? And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Charles. And Sarah, we are giving you the last word. So go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to circle back to Carlos's first point, which wasn't a question, but in quoting Gramsci, and cultural hegemony. It is true that what has happened with Palestine is you have millions of people who realize if they're lying to us every day about Palestine, then everything else is probably also a lie. In other words, the credibility of the media, the credibility of the whole establishment here in the US and in the EU and in so many ways throughout West Asia is now in question. So people are challenging on Palestine, but it turns the tables on everything said against China, against Iran. We should really understand what is crumbling and what is changing. I especially, though, do want to comment on this question of handing over governance in Palestine to technocrats. We're many steps from that, first of all, from that stage. Hamas is the elected government of Gaza. And there is a confidence in the people as a whole who have stood through these 2 years. Any technocratic government that is established will also be technocrats who have lost family members, who have martyrs, who have no support for Zionism, and will, in their own ways, whether with a wink and a nod, make sure that Palestine continues. I really feel confident in that what Hamas is doing, and it's not only Hamas, there's a whole number of resistance organizations that are in the very fabric of Gaza, is showing confidence in their own people that any government that is set up will burn through. And resistance is in the culture. And even when you take away everything from people, they will find ways to resist. I mean, prisoners who are stripped naked, will find ways to put on a hunger fast or write in their own blood. You really have to see what is part of the resistance culture in Gaza today and have confidence in it. So we shouldn't from here say, oh, they're going to throw it all away as if these are inexperienced people in resistance. They are not inexperienced. They have gone many rounds in the past. Most of the leadership really has been destroyed, and a whole new generation, even more aware, has arisen that's how survival happens. And I've been opposing Zionism now more than 50 years, but seen a time when it went from having complete global support to now it's just a shred and hated in the US and hated especially, I would say, among Jewish youth today who were raised to be Zionists and now are horrified. So there's a lot going on in people's minds that we should be respectful of and be confident in. Just in winding up, I very much agree that a larger war is in the planning. I do think that Iran, who constantly improves their technology, and in the last round with Israel, it was Israel who really had to call a halt and get the US involved. They couldn't sustain another day of the attacks. It did expose the agents in Iran, and it undercut a generation that the US had spent a lot of time trying to pull into the culture of the West, who now want nothing to do with the West. They've been under the bombs. And so, if anything, Iran is in a stronger position to withstand. And there's aid coming to them, aid coming also to Yemen. And I would say that the Palestinians have learned. They know well how to repurpose every missile that is thrown at them into their own defense capacity. So I think we need confidence in that and not be naysaying. On the flotilla is one of hundreds and hundreds of actions. But what it did do throughout the Mediterranean was give room for mass intervention. There were in every city, almost as the flotilla went past, or boats set sail, or people participated in one person from a union, the whole union would follow it. So it gave a way for mass intervention. Is it the whole solution, what was on those little boats? Of course not. Wouldn't feed the people for one day, not one day. But it exposed the hunger and the anger. It gave voice to that. So let's not put down any kind of struggle that arises, whether it is a petition or a resolution or a banner drop. At the same time, let's defend those who are taking direct action against those who produce the weapons and lie every day. And I think there are people who really have to strengthen the defense there, because there's the number of people facing charges in the West, at least here in the U.S., is astounding. Criminal charges on all kinds of fabricated things. Some that they did do and lots of things that they didn't do, but they're charged. So we got to defend all those who are fighting, regardless of the charge, because they're fighting. That's why. So let me just wind up with saying that I had one other point here. Hold on a second. Well, we'll leave it with that. As I say, there is a new round. This is not the end, and this has also been always true with Palestine. You know, almost 80 years now. It's been one generation follows another, each one more sophisticated in technology and politically more understanding how to unite the population. So I think we should have confidence. That is what resistance does. It constantly sharpens the ability to learn from those around you and from past mistakes, of which there always will be when you're fighting, but to learn from it and grow more sophisticated, more determined. I don't see any in any statement from Hamas that's coming out a demoralization or a surrender. It's not. It is, we're in this, we're continuing. You got to deal with us, and that is what they have asserted. So, on a world scale, let's keep going. And thank you for today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that's such an important thought that you expressed just at the end. It reminds me of the important distinction that one must make between optimism, which is just a kind of, positive attitude, sort of whistling in the wind and so on, and hope, which comes from experience, comes from winning small victories, which will, of course, in the end, at some point, add up to a big victory. And it's not just about individuals, it's about liberating entire peoples. And therefore we are, Anyway, it's so wonderful. Thank you. I just want to close by saying that please, if you liked this discussion, please share it on social media to any lists that you belong to, share it with friends, talk about it, and also tell them about our work. I think that increasingly what I'm finding is that the IMG in its own little way is creating a small community of discussions and of resistance. And I think discussion, understanding, resistance, action, and so on. And I hope that you will help us continue this work. And of course, we will work with many other groups and organizations that are doing the same thing. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for participating. You'll soon hear about our next webinar. So please subscribe to our list and see you next time. And let's continue this discussion and many others. Thank you and goodbye.